Imagine walking alone in an abandoned convent, the air thick with dust, the walls whispering secrets of the past. You hear faint footsteps behind you, but when you turn, nothing's there. A cold breeze brushes your neck, and then a shadow appears, twisted, faceless, moving closer with every heartbeat. This is where Maria's nightmare begins, and what she discovers will haunt her forever. The monastery of Saint Aurelia had been abandoned for nearly 50 years, but to Maria, it felt disturbingly alive from the moment she pushed open the rusted iron gate. A sharp November wind cut through the broken stone arches, carrying a faint scent of old incense mixed with something metallic, something that smelled unmistakably like blood. She hesitated at the entrance, gripping her flashlight as its beam trembled across the courtyard. Cracked statues of saints stood like silent judges, their hollow eyes following her every step. In the center, a collapsed stone fountain oozed a thick, dark liquid that definitely wasn't water. Local legends claimed a nun had been brutally tortured here decades ago for a sin shrouded in secrecy. Some whispered she had defied the clergy. Others insisted she delved into forbidden rituals. But Maria wasn't here for stories. She was filming a documentary on abandoned holy sites. She expected dust, silence, maybe some eerie visuals. She did not expect the heavy, suffocating feeling that something unseen was lurking just beyond the shadows. As she crossed the threshold, the wooden door behind her slammed shut with a violent crack that echoed through the hall. Maria spun around, her breath catching in her throat. No wind, no movement, only a crushing silence that wrapped around her like cold hands pressing into her ribs. She exhaled shakily. Then, from the far end of the corridor, came a whisper, soft, broken, unmistakably feminine. "Please don't." Maria froze. Her flashlight flickered. Slow, dragging footsteps emerged from the darkness ahead, each step wet, deliberate wrong. In that terrifying moment, Maria understood something with absolute clarity. The stories were real. Someone, something still roamed this monastery, and it did not want her here. Maria forced herself to breathe as she moved deeper into the entrance hall. The air grew colder, as if the monastery itself exhaled frost with every step she took. Her flashlight skimmed along old wooden pews covered in thick dust, the kind that suggested no human had stepped here for decades. Yet the whisper she heard moments ago still echoed inside her ears. Too clear, too human, too recent. On the left wall hung a massive painting of Saint Aurelia. The saint's face was supposed to be serene, but the paint had cracked in a way that twisted her expression into something pained, almost terrified. Maria lifted her camera to record, but as soon as she pressed the button, the temperature around her dropped violently. Her breath turned white. The painting's eyes glistened, just for a second, as if they moved. Maria stumbled back, adrenaline surging. She blinked hard, once, twice, but the eyes were lifeless again. She exhaled shakily and tried to rationalize it. Moisture? A trick of the light? Anything but the truth clawing at the edges of her mind. A sudden metallic clang rang out from the upper floor, something heavy dragging across stone. Maria aimed her flashlight upward, but the staircase was swallowed in darkness so thick it looked alive. Then came the whisper again. Closer. A trembling voice filled with dread. "Leave before she comes." Maria felt her skin crawl. "Who's there?" she whispered, though her voice barely escaped her throat. No answer, just a chilling silence, followed by a slow tapping from above, like fingernails clicking rhythmically against the floor. Maria tightened her grip on the camera. Whatever was upstairs wasn't human, and it was awake. Maria approached the staircase with hesitant steps, each one echoing too loudly in the hollow darkness. The banister was splintered, the wood cracked as if someone, or something, had clawed through it. She lifted her flashlight, and the beam barely pierced the thick shadow waiting above. It felt less like darkness and more like a presence watching her descend into its territory. Halfway up, she paused. A cold draft brushed past her ear, carrying a faint, agonized moan. Then, a single word breathed directly into her other ear. "Run." Maria whipped around, but the hall behind her was empty. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest, but she forced herself upward. She needed answers. She needed to see. On the second floor, the hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with rusted metal doors. Former cells where the nuns once practiced silence and solitude. Now they resembled prison doors. Some were slightly open, revealing darkness thicker than the corridor itself. As Maria stepped forward, a door on her left creaked open farther, slow and deliberate. She swung her flashlight toward it. A face stared back at her, pale, sunken, eyes black as tar. A young nun, yet impossibly translucent, like a shadow wearing a habit. Maria gasped, stumbling backward. The apparition opened its mouth as if to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, its jaw stretched too wide, cracking unnaturally. Then it snapped shut and pointed behind Maria. Maria turned slowly. At the far end of the hallway, a tall figure in a torn nun's robe stood motionless, head tilted. The torn nun, the one from the legends. She was real, and she was watching. Maria's legs felt like lead as she moved down the corridor. The image of the torn nun burned in her mind. The walls were paper-thin with age. Faded hymn sheets clung to them like mournful flags. As she passed one of the small cells, the flashlight beam caught something on the floor. A scrap of habit, yellowed and stiff with age, but stained dark at the hem. The smell hit her then. Iron and old rot, and beneath it, an unmistakable copper tang. Blood. She crouched, fingers trembling, and found tiny footprints in the dust, bare, delicate, as if made by someone barefoot. They led away from the cell and vanished at the foot of a short stair that descended into the bowels of the monastery. Her recorder whispered softly in her hand. The little red light blinked, oblivious to what her ears already heard. A distant, wet tearing sound, like fabric and flesh being ripped apart. Her breath came shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, but curiosity, darker and more foolish than fear, pulled her forward. She took the steps two at a time, descending into a cooler, damper space. The air grew heavy with the scent of iron. Candles, long melted to stubs, dotted alcoves. Some had black wax that reflected no light. At the very bottom, a low door stood half open, warped by time. Beyond it, the cellar opened into a vaulted room where chains hung from the ceiling like ribs. On the far side, nailed to a wooden cross, a shredded habit flapped in a draft. Torn longways, splattered, clotted. Around it, scratched into the wood, names. Some recent, some eaten by age. One name she recognized in horror. The nun from the legend. Her name ringed with deep gouges like someone had tried to erase it and failed. Maria's camera recorded in a mechanical whisper, but she scarcely heard it. The room seemed to breathe around her, exhaling the stench of old wounds. The chains above swayed though no wind moved. Each clink sounded like a warning. She stepped closer to the cross and peered at the habit. There were ragged tears that revealed not just shredded cloth but patches of dark, leathery skin beneath, stitched crudely to the fabric. The sight made bile rise in her throat. On the wooden planks beneath the cross, there were marks, deep gouges scored by something with terrible force. Between them lay scrapings of tissue, gray and dry, like flakes of something that had once been warm. In a corner, a dented metal box sat half-buried under dust. Maria opened it with numb hands. Inside lay a thin leather-bound journal and a rosary with one bead cracked in two. Her fingers shook as she flipped the fragile pages. The handwriting was uneven, a priest's ink stained with tears or rust. The entries were a ledger and a confessional, dates, names, pleas. One passage, written in a hurried scrawl, stopped her cold. We bound her, but she would not sleep. Her prayers became screams. We cut her words from her mouth to keep the choir intact. Now the habit will not let go. The final line was smeared, as if stained with something that bled, and beneath it someone had carved 3 words into the inside cover. Do not let her out. Maria slammed the box shut. A distant keening rose from deeper tunnels, a sound like 1,000 nails dragged across flesh, and for the first time, she understood the scale of what had happened here. The monastery had been more than a place of prayer. It had been a chamber of punishment, and whatever had been punished had not stayed dead. Maria felt the world tilt. The journal had given the story a shape, what they did, how they tried to silence her, but it didn't explain what came after. As she stepped back, something shifted in the corner of the room. The air rippled, and a figure separated from the dark. Small at first, then stretching, as if uncoiling from inside the shadow itself. It was the torn nun, but younger somehow. Her habit hung in strips, her face a mask of pale, lacerated flesh, and where an eye should have been was a black, bottomless hollow. She moved soundlessly, yet the floorboards announced each of her steps with a wet, sucking sound. "Why are you here?" Maria asked aloud, the recorder between her hands. The voice that answered was not wholly human. It had the faint, reedy cadence of chant under a woman's rasp. "They bound me to the prayers," it said. "They cut my mouth so my words would not rise. I wait beneath their hymns. I am hungry." The room seemed to lean in toward the nun's confession. The torn habit fluttered and revealed jagged stitching, threads of something that gleamed like dried blood. Maria's hand rose slowly, as if on its own, toward the cross. She wanted to run, to flee into the stairwell and never look back. Instead, compelled by a mixture of dread and the need to document the truth, she edged forward, pressing the camera between her fingers like a shield. The nun's head tilted. A smile cracked along her split lips. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay, and I will show you what faith eats." Maria's chest tightened. The monastery's silence answered with a single, wet scrape, coming from the shadows behind the cross. The torn nun's hollow eyes seemed to glow, patient and terrible, and Maria realized with a cold clarity that she was not the one recording the story anymore. She had become part of it. Maria stumbled backward as the scraping behind the cross grew louder, like something heavy dragging itself across stone. The torn nun didn't move, yet her presence thickened the air, as if the darkness bent around her shape. Maria's flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied, revealing a long gash in the wall where the stones had been forced outward from the inside. Something had pushed through. A pale hand slipped out of that crack, thin, bony, fingers too long to be human. Felt its way across the wall like it was searching for heat. Maria froze. The nun turned her head toward the hand, a faint clicking escaping her throat, almost approving. Then the hand pulled back, and something else slid forward. A face. Not a whole one, but half of it, pressed between the stones. It was stretched, flattened, as if someone had tried to pull a person through a space too small to contain them. The eye socket was empty. The jaw hung loose as if unhinged. When it spoke, it was through torn vocal cords. "They fed us to her, one by one." Maria's knees nearly buckled. More pale shapes shifted behind the crack. Faces, fingers, limbs. The dead of the monastery. The ones punished. The ones the journal hinted weren't allowed to die. The torn nun drifted closer to Maria, her movements gliding, not stepping. "They prayed," she whispered. "But their prayers were for themselves, not for us, never for us." The wall convulsed. A dozen pale arms reached outward at once, grasping the edges, pulling, widening the crack. Dust rained down. Stones split. The half-face shrieked. A long, desperate sound, and something massive began pushing through the opening. Maria ran. She didn't need to see the rest. Her instincts screamed that whatever was emerging was not a soul, not a spirit, but something built from all of them. The hallway swallowed her flashlight beam as Maria sprinted upward, her breath stabbing at her ribs. Behind her, something hammered against the stone, each impact shaking dust from the ceiling. The monastery was waking, groaning, as if the entire place had become a single body responding to her fear. When she reached the upper floor, the air had changed. It was warmer, too warm. The hallway flickered with dim orange light, as though lit by unseen candles. Whispering drifted along the walls. Broken prayers spoken in voices that didn't belong to any living throat. She pressed herself against the wall and peeked around a corner. There, kneeling in the center of the hall, were 3 nuns, or what had once been nuns. Their habits were shredded like the torn nuns, but their heads were twisted backward, faces staring at her upside down with bulging eyes. Their mouths hung open, lips missing, teeth exposed in a permanent scream. One of them twitched, then another. Then all three rose to their feet in a single jerking motion, as if pulled by strings. Maria clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Their bodies were limp, but they moved anyway, swaying, stepping out of rhythm, guided by something else. Something behind them. Then she saw it. A shadow stretching across the far wall. Longer than any person, its arms dragging across the floor like vines. The torn nun was not alone. She controlled others, or they fed her strength. The shadow raised its arm, and all three broken nuns twisted toward Maria at once. Their voices layered into one chilling whisper. "Join the choir." Maria sprinted again, the echo of their stiff footsteps following her like a heartbeat made of bone. Maria darted into a side room, slamming the door behind her and turning the lock with shaking fingers. The room was a storage chamber, dust-covered, cramped, smelling of mold and old incense. She pressed her ear to the door. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Silence stretched thin and sharp. Then 3 gentle taps. Top, top, top. As if a knuckle dragged softly against the wood, asking politely to be let in. Maria backed away slowly. Her flashlight beam swept across the room and caught on a mirror leaning against the wall. But the reflection wasn't hers. Standing behind her reflection was the torn nun, her head bowed as if in silent prayer. Maria spun around. Nothing. The room was empty, her heart hammered. When she looked back at the mirror, the nun was closer. Her face lifted. A slit of a smile opened across her torn lips. Words bled across the surface of the mirror, written from the inside of the reflection. "Silence is a sin." The glass vibrated. Cracks spidered outward. Maria stumbled backward until her spine hit a shelf. Her breath came in gasps, ragged and thin. The mirror bulged outward, like something pressing from the other side. Fingers formed in the glass, stretching it like soft skin. She grabbed the nearest object, a rusted candlestick, and hurled it at the mirror. It shattered into a rain of shards, each fragment reflecting a different image. The torn nun's eye, the cracked smiles of the broken nuns, the half-face from the wall, the endless shadow. The pieces on the floor trembled, then began pulling themselves back together, reforming. Maria didn't wait. She unlocked the door and ran, the sound of glass knitting itself behind her like bones resetting. Maria burst back into the main hall, lungs burning, her pulse roaring in her ears. She didn't know where to go. Every corridor led deeper into the rot of the monastery's secrets. Somewhere behind her, distant but getting closer, she heard the scraping chorus of the broken nuns. Her mind raced. She needed an exit, a window, a weak wall, anything. Then she remembered something from the journal, the line, "The habit will not let go." The torn nun was bound to the habit or bound by it. If the habit was destroyed, burned, maybe the curse might break, or it might unleash something worse. She didn't have time to weigh the risk. She sprinted toward the cellar again, forcing herself back into the darkness she had escaped minutes earlier. The air felt thicker now, as if the monastery knew her intent and was trying to stop her. Voices rose from the walls, pleading, angry, mournful. When she reached the cross, the shredded habit was still nailed there, dripping something dark and warm that hadn't been dripping before. The torn nun appeared behind her reflection in the metal box, then behind her shadow, then finally right behind her, silent, towering, the hollow eye fixed on her. Maria grabbed a half-burnt candle from the floor, struck a match with shaking hands, and touched the flame to the edge of the habit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fabric convulsed, shrieked. A scream tore through the monastery, shaking dust from the rafters. The habit writhed like a living thing, its threads twisting like veins trying to escape the fire. Behind her, the torn nun let out a sound that froze Maria's spine. Half prayer, half howl. The fabric caught fire fully, and that was when the monastery began to collapse. As Maria stepped deeper into the underground hall, the temperature dropped so sharply that every breath she exhaled turned into a trembling cloud of white mist. The darkness no longer felt empty. It pulsed with distant murmurs, like a choir humming beneath the stone floor. At first, it sounded sacred, almost comforting, until Maria realized the voices weren't singing. They were crying. Whispers seeped through the cracked walls, carrying fragments of sorrow too old to belong to the living. Maria raised her flashlight with trembling hands, its beams slicing through swirling dust. Her foot struck something hard. She looked down and felt her stomach twist. A rosary, but every bead was carved into a distorted, screaming face. She dropped it instantly. The hymns abruptly sharpened into frantic wails. At the far end of the corridor, a shadow drifted into view. A torn veil, a crooked silhouette, a head tilting at a horrifying angle. The shredded nun had found her. Maria backed away, but the stone floor behind her began to throb like a beating heart, trapping her between two evils. She wasn't just in a haunted corridor. She was inside a living relic that mourned its own torment. Maria stumbled into a side chamber and slammed the heavy wooden door behind her. The cries outside faded to a low, trembling vibration, but the silence inside the room was far worse. There was only one object in the room, an old confessional booth, its wood blackened by time and something darker. From the small metal grate, a thick liquid dripped slowly, dark, sticky, fresh blood. Against every instinct, Maria leaned closer. A frail voice whispered from inside the booth, "Forgive me. She won't let us rest." Maria froze. The voice trembled again. "She tore us apart because we believed." Before Maria could move, a pale, cracked hand shot through the grate. Thin, shaking, burned with rosary marks. It groped wildly, reaching for her face. The confessional began to tremble violently, as if someone trapped inside was thrashing to break free. The wood split open, bleeding from its seams. Maria pulled back, but the blood on the ground thickened, clutching her shoes like glue. Behind her, the confessional door burst open with a shriek no human throat could produce. Maria escaped into another chamber where candles along the walls ignited one by one, casting twitching shadows that moved independently of the flames. In the center of the room hung a massive veil woven entirely of black, thorn-covered vines. Blood dripped from each thorn, vanishing before it hit the floor. Under the veil stood statues of nuns, their faces shrouded in cloth, hands clasped in eternal prayer. Maria inched closer. One statue twitched, then another, and another. One lifted its head toward her. Beneath the cloth was not a face but a hollow cavity lined with jagged teeth. They stepped toward her in perfect, unnatural synchronization, whispering broken Latin prayers. Behind them, the thorned veil lifted slowly, as if pulled by unseen hands. There she was, the shredded nun, eyes burning with holy rage, torn habit swaying like a corpse's shroud. She raised her arms. The statues obeyed. The statues lunged toward Maria, their movements stiff yet terrifyingly precise. She squeezed through a narrow gap between them, but a thorn-covered hand scraped her arm, leaving a burning cut. She stumbled into a circular chamber lit by a single lantern swinging from the ceiling. Every inch of the walls was carved with scenes of torture, nuns punishing sinners with holy fury. But the carvings were moving. Stone hands reached out from the walls, clutching her clothes. Silent screams twisted from the carved mouths, their expressions stretching grotesquely wide. Maria fought them off, but a massive stone hand clamped around her ankle and yanked hard. Then the shredded nun stepped into the doorway. Instantly, the carvings froze in reverent submission. The air thickened, impossibly heavy, suffocating. The nun whispered one word, "Kneel." The stone hand squeezed tighter. Maria screamed and kicked, her ankle burning under the stone's crushing grip. The shredded nun moved closer, her torn habit dragging across the floor like a funeral cloth. She raised a bony finger toward Maria's forehead. As it neared her skin, a torrent of whispers flooded her mind, voices of trapped souls pleading with her to fight. something inside Maria snapped. She leaped upward and grabbed the swinging lantern chain. Using all her strength, she pulled herself up. The stone hand cracked, then shattered completely. The nun shrieked, a piercing wail that shook dust from the ceiling. The statues charged again, but Maria swung the lantern like a weapon, smashing one to pieces. She hit the floor hard, gasping, but something had changed. The nun hesitated. No one had ever resisted her before. Maria raised the lantern, flame trembling but alive. For the first time, the shredded nun looked genuinely afraid. Maria tried to sleep, but the damp walls of the corridor seemed alive, whispering her name, Marie, at a terrifyingly slow pace. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the whispers grew louder, forming broken words, pleading with her. She rose from her bed, heart pounding, and the air around her felt thicker with every step. From behind the old wardrobe, she heard the faint crackling of fabric, a sound she recognized immediately. The shredded nun was near. Maria's flashlight flickered, and shadows twisted unnaturally across the room. She realized with horror that the presence was no longer confined to the corridors. It had entered her room, watching, waiting, patient and cruel. On the desk, Maria noticed an ancient leather confessional journal that had not been there before. Its pages were yellowed, filled with handwriting of an unknown nun, telling stories of a silent bleed curse and how a nun had been tortured inside the convent decades ago. The last page shocked Maria. It was written in fresh ink and dated the night before. The words seemed to speak directly to her. Maria, you called to me last night. Now it's my turn to answer. The room chilled instantly, and Maria felt unseen eyes piercing her, testing her courage. Every instinct screamed for her to leave, but something compelled her to keep reading. As night fell, the convent's only generator failed. Darkness enveloped everything, turning the silence into a living nightmare. Maria tried to light a candle, but the flames kept extinguishing themselves. Suddenly, slow footsteps echoed through the corridor, dragging, scraping. They stopped at her bedroom door. Maria froze, breath caught in her throat. The door creaked open slowly, as if moved by invisible hands. A shadow appeared, tall, ragged, its limbs twisted unnaturally. A smell of burnt incense mixed with old blood filled the room. Maria clutched the journal as if it were her only protection. The shredded nun was here. Maria ran through the corridor, but the walls seemed to bleed thin red lines, and the floor became sticky under her feet. Every step sounded like bones crunching. She tried to find the exit, but the familiar hallways had transformed into a never-ending maze. Suddenly, the ancient bells in the convent tower rang on their own. Each chime shook the walls, and the shredded nun appeared in fleeting flashes, sometimes to the left, sometimes above, sometimes directly behind her. Maria screamed, ran blindly, and cried, but the corridor seemed alive, pushing her towards the inevitable. Finally, Maria reached the old ritual hall. Candles ignited as she entered, one by one, casting flickering shadows. In the center stood the shredded nun, her back hunched, habit torn, and a faceless void where her eyes should be. Maria steadied herself, holding the confessional journal tightly. "What do you want from me?" she shouted. The nun remained still. Then a voice came from deep in the ground. "Because you are the only one who still hears my scream." The body began to levitate slowly, the candles dancing around her like a dark ritual. Maria realized this confrontation would decide whether she survived or became the next victim.